Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Daniel Hendrick Experience. I'm really glad you're here. We have a fascinating podcast for you today. When I first had the idea of doing a podcast about opera singers, I also wanted to bring in psychology and the ingredients that it takes to be an internationally acclaimed opera singer. What is the psychology behind that? What are the emotions that you have to deal with? Well, if you remember in our very first podcast with the tenor John Kais, he spoke about that very subject matter. He was going through some personal issues in his life that caused a lot of trauma and really derailed him from his operatic career. And he ended up with a psychotherapist by the name of Dr. Elliot Zeisel. And Dr. Elliot Zeisel says most of life takes place in groups. He is a psychoanalyst and leader in the field of group psychotherapy. Zeisel's statement comes up in a conversation about Group, the project he's involved in. It's a pilot filmed with actors playing members of a psychoanalytic group in New York City, and it's based on Dr. Irvin Yalom's The Schopenhauer Cure, a novel that highlights the effectiveness of group treatment. And this is exactly what my friend John Kais did. And he credits Dr. Zeisel with being the person and the instrument that helped him get beyond those personal issues and resume an amazing operatic career. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm just going to bring in Dr. Elliot Zeisel, and we're going to chat a minute, and then we're going to bring in John Kais as well. So stay tuned. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey, hi Daniel.
Hello, Dr. Zeisel. Welcome.
Morning. Thank you.
Glad you're
Okay.
here. Well, I'm excited about our interview today. I saw your YouTube where you were talking about group
Uh-huh.
uh, and how you met the French screenplay writer, and now not
Yep.
only are you a psychoanalyst, but you're also an actor.
Imagine. Yeah. It's a late in life development, and it's unexpected, but not so unexpected in a way. The fellow I studied with, I was very lucky as a young man. I don't know how much of this you know from some of the things that are on the internet, but when I was 22, I made a decision to go to graduate school and found an analyst. And then a year later, found an individual analyst to start. And then a year later, found a group analyst. And that was Louis Ormont. So little did I know when I joined this group with Lou Ormont that Lou, uh, before becoming a psychologist, was a graduate of the Yale School of Drama, a playwright, a screenwriter. And his method of teaching, he was a wonderful teacher, was informed by his work in the theater. So teaching became a performance art if you worked with him. And he trained a
Mm.
couple of generations of people like myself to be clinician teachers, which is in part what led me to the meeting where I met Alexi Lloyd and where this whole project began to unfold.
Wow.
So,
Well, I could tell just by watching you and your body language on that video that you were super excited about doing that.
oh, it was a wonderful development, and I'm very proud to say that apart from the viewership on YouTube, it's become something of a textbook that's used around the world to teach group process and group leadership. So I've been invited into classrooms for social work graduate students, for psychology students, sometimes for a mix of psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers, and other mental health disciplines to view the film, view the 13 chapters, and stop the action after a portion is played. You can play 30 seconds of it or a minute of it and stop the action and then say to the audience, or they'll say to me, what were you feeling? Why did you say that? How else could that have been handled? And it becomes a wonderful deep dive into an exploration of theory and practice of how this work is actually accomplished. So
Mm,
I'm just delighted with that development. That's the
that
textbook I'll never have to write.
that's wonderful. That is
Yep,
super fascinating.
yep.
Well, I
Tell me about you. How do you get to your work?
well, did you know I'm a retired opera singer?
No, I did not. I
Okay.
did not.
So, actually, I'll talk about this later, but this is my life story. It's called Know You Know. And you may be aware of a condition called spasmodic dysphonia.
I know about focal dystonia in musicians I've worked with. So spasmodic dystonia, I assume, has something to do with vocal cords.
Yes. So to make a
Mhm.
long story short, when I was young, I was a protege of a very famous opera tenor who was the idol of Pavarotti. And I went to a competition in Italy,
What
and
was his person's name?
his name was Giuseppe Di Stefano.
Hmm.
Super, he was the Pavarotti before Pavarotti. So,
Hmm.
super famous guy. But anyhow, to make a long story short, I had strep throat the year that I went to
Um,
Italy for this competition. And I kind of forced my instrument because it was an unbelievable opportunity. I had this world famous guy pushing me. Well, to make a long story short, I lost my voice. But back then, they did not know what spasmodic dysphonia was.
sure, sure.
Even a
It's an
newspaper
identity.
even a newspaper did an article about how I was the next Jose Carreras and I blew it, right? So short one day playing with my dog, the dog growled at me and I growled back and I felt a shock from my brain to my throat. And that was the first time I could feel phonation because I talk like Kennedy does, that's running for president with spasmodic dysphonia. And all of a sudden, and that began my process of getting my voice back. So from the time
Fantastic.
time I lost it, 8 years later, I made my debut at Lincoln Center in Mephistopheles.
That's great. That's a wonderful story. So
Yes,
you actually did have a career as a tenor.
yes, yes, I did. In San Francisco Opera, all over Europe.
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful. Oh, great.
yes,
Wonderful.
but
And trained where in the States did you train?
well, I trained in New York. But my real training was, which is what I document in the book, I had a lot of what people call out of body experiences and like divine intervention and
Hmm.
spiritual awakenings that
Hmm.
pushed me forward and really gave me information that I didn't have that helped
Uh-huh.
me to get my voice back.
Wonderful. Great.
And
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Uh-huh. And the podcasting started.
It was just a hobby at the beginning. My middle son kept telling me, Dad, you have all of these experiences with opera singers around the world. You should do a podcast about it. And because
Uh-huh.
I'm very much into the psychology of it,
Great.
which we'll talk about more, because I learned so much about roadblocks that we put in our own way along the in our own past. So anyhow,
Sorry.
when John spoke about what happened with you, I'm like, well, that's what we want to talk about on this show. We're starting
Hmm.
off with opera singers, but eventually I want to talk with, athletes from around the world. What is it that we all have in common that enables us to perform at that very high level? And what are
It's
the
fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah.
what are the obstacles that we have to go through?
Yeah.
Um, for instance, one obstacle I had a rear admiral who was a deacon in the church who came to me and told me that I was being irresponsible, and that I was because I was spending the money on lessons and doctors. And I said, Larry, are there good doctors? Yes. Are there bad doctors? Yes. Are there good presidents? Oh, yes. Well, I know them. I was there
Yeah.
with them. And I said, Larry, I have no idea whether you're a good rear admiral or a bad one. So don't come into my house and tell me that I'm not demonstrating leadership.
Good for you.
So
Good for
anyhow,
you.
That's the kind of stuff that the book is about and my life was about, is
Good for you.
having, it's knowing, I had a knowingness within my soul that I was supposed to sing, and
Yes.
no one was going to tell me otherwise, no matter what the evidence was. And so,
Testimony to a capacity in you, a drive, a determination. You can call it a number of different things, but it's essentially there's innate and some sort of innate drive, something you were endowed with that was driven to create, and you are not going to take no for an answer because the drive is so powerful. The pull to create is so powerful that to do otherwise would be to deny your very person, your reason for being on this earth.
yes, you nailed it.
I understand that. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
gathered that you did.
Well, it's something I work with every day with anybody I work with. The pull to destroy and the pull to create uh, is present in everybody. And the tension between those two positions on a minute to minute basis in everyday life is much about the work that I do. So, how to help people unblock, free themselves from the obstacles that get in the way of creating, and how to keep an eye on the parts of them that are determined to destroy. Because I'm fond of saying that just like in nature, nothing in nature expands endlessly. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. A flower blooms in the morning, and at night it closes up. So there's an endless process of expansion and contraction in natural life. And the
Mm-hmm.
same is true in interpersonal life and intrapsychic life. So none of us can remain endlessly creative. We create and then we retract, we
Mm-hmm.
contract, and
Mm-hmm.
in the contraction there is an opportunity to be contemplative, where there's an opportunity to be destructive. You can sit quietly and think about what you've just created, and think about the next thing you're going to do to promote more creation. Or for some people, the act of creation invites an equal and equivalent force that is determined to destroy. Oh, hey, John.
Hi, Dr. Z.
Yay!
Great to
Sorry
see
about
you.
the delay.
Oh,
Sorry to
well,
interrupt. I'm being a tenor and a realtor. We're both always late.
no, with that voice, you're still a tenor in my mind, buddy.
I appreciate it.
uh,
So great to
well,
see you. My goodness.
Yeah, great to see you, John.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just sit back and listen for a little while and catch up.
Well, so I was learning from Daniel about his interest in the podcast, in artists, and telling their stories. And I was saying that I'm working on a new film project that tells the story of two journeyman painters, people who've spent their entire lives working at their craft. And they've never become wealthy, they've never become famous, but they labor at it and they sustain each other through the process. They
Mm.
live in a four-story Victorian house in Catskill, New York, across the river from me. And they have a studio on the second floor, a studio on the third floor, a frame building shop on the fourth floor, and 10,078 LP records.
Wow.
oh my goodness.
Jean collects records, and Barbara uh, does other things to keep herself in the art. The point of the story is that for most people who enter the field of artistic creation, whether it's as a fine artist or a performing artist, they haven't got a clue as to what's ahead.
Mm.
Not an idea, because it's an impossibly difficult choice we're making in
Mm-hmm.
life. So in this documentary that we're working on, we hope to tell the story of these two people. Jean, for example, taught at a local prison for 22 years just to support them, to keep them in food and clothing, and paint as well. So the goal is to get them in this documentary to capture something of what it means to be a journeyman artist, and then to get them talking about the process that helped the two of them have the skill, the ability, the talent. They're enormously talented. Gene is fond of saying, I paint horizontally, he paints landscapes, and Barbara paints vertically. She does the figure. I'm going to get them in a room with a bunch of young artists, and we're going to get them talking together about what lies ahead. The young artists haven't got a clue, no understanding whatsoever. As the two of you well know, at the outset of your career in your 20s, did you have any idea what lay ahead?
No.
I thought I did.
I knew I didn't.
and then nature intervenes. So anyway, that's another branch of what we're talking about.
I think what Daniel did with this podcast series is also very interesting in the sense that he's, he interviewed me post-career, has interviewed some other, or will be interviewing others that have gone through their whole career and finished, some in the midst of their career, some that, didn't have as big or successful maybe in what they thought they were going to do. And also a young baritone, Chandler Ben, who is literally just starting his career going to graduate school.
Yes.
Perfect.
And
It
Anthony,
parallels. Yeah.
And Anthony Leon as well, a young tenor that's just taken the world by storm.
Yeah, he just won the Welsh singing competition, the biggest singing competition in the world. So, yeah, a really nice cross-section of the different levels. I think it's great.
Wonderful.
And John was the very first guest and was gracious enough to start telling all of his friends about the podcast. And all of a sudden I have opera singers from all over the world coming on the show. So
fantastic. Great.
And a doctor who I haven't spoken with for over 20 years. and I called and left a message and got
Actually, John, that's probably not true. In your mind, you've been talking to me periodically.
Absolutely. That's true.
All right.
And I always have the bulk of the conversations.
Great.
No, but it was amazing when I did leave a message and I get a text back in about 10 minutes. I'm in Africa. I'll call you back. That was wonderful.
Great.
Well, Dr. Zeisel, the reason that we wanted to have you on is in our first podcast, John spoke about how when I think it was Houston Opera you were with, John, where you had
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't with Dr. Zell when I was in Houston, but I had the situation with the drinking.
Okay.
Quit drinking, and then I had met Dr. Z after the fact. But I think the two biggest events that I had with Dr. Zeisel were the losing my voice through divorce. And how he made me sing in group.
There we go.
Yeah,
now
and then also the just being a part of the group and how.
If I could just amend that a little, I don't think I could make you do anything. I think what we did is we collaborated, and you helped me understand how to help you unlock the resistance to performing in front of other people.
Yeah,
in front of the group.
Very true. Yeah,
right.
And the other one was when we started. When I first got into group, how after a few sessions with the group, you kind of out of the blue said, "Okay, well, let's go around the room and find out what everybody thinks about John." And
I said that.
Pretty much, yeah. It was a life-changing experience for me because to be confronted with what people really are thinking, because the group was I think trained and open to just being honest. And I thought everybody was going to say, he's such a great guy, he's so wonderful. And that a couple people did say that, but then a few had some other very interesting comments about what they thought about me. And it was it really changed my life because I was able to realize, as I said to Daniel before, you can't please everyone all the time. And also to maybe read the room better and also listen more. So after that event, I found myself listening much more, much better, and not just kind of, as I'm doing now, grandstanding and filibustering.
Yeah, you're a tenor, brother. So, Dr. Zeisel, if you could, for those folks out there who don't really know what group is, can you tell us, because you're like the man for that?
Well, a group is an opportunity for people who are determined to know more about themselves and more about their relationships, an opportunity for them to learn about those two things. People who come to group are usually interested in more self-knowledge and in developing a facility with their feeling life that would help them better understand their relationships with other people. So with that in mind, the groups I work with, they meet once a week for an hour and a half. The understanding between the group members and myself is that the only contact we're going to have is in the group session. We limit the exposure to the group room. The reason for that is that in the room, you'll end up finding in the personalities of the other members, the people who are most significant for you in life. You'll find your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your children, your spouse, your partner, your lover. You find aspects of their character revealed in the personalities of the other members. And with that in mind, there's a really dynamic opportunity to develop relationships that very closely resemble what happens outside in life. So your behavior that only you know about in detail when you first arrive in group is suddenly available for other members to understand and experience too. And as they do that, you have an opportunity to feel pulled into yourself and the process with other people in a way that is characteristic of what happens outside. So all the adaptive things that you're able to do and all the maladaptive things that you do suddenly become available for the group to see and work with. So with that in mind, for example, when I was 23, I think I started group. And I arrived in group with a very limited emotional repertoire when it came to conflict. In my family, my father would rage when he got upset, and my mother would somatize. She'd get a stomach ache. She developed an ulcer. So it took a few relationships in my late adolescence, my early 20s, for me to realize, with the help of some wonderful girlfriends, that I needed help. And when I went to group, I suddenly saw and experienced people in conflict in ways that I had never witnessed before, in an intimate way that I had never witnessed before. They would fight, and they'd be able to say things to each other in the heat of the moment, and then it would be over, and they'd move on. And that was eye-opening for me. So in group, there's the opportunity for a re-education, an emotional education that we often don't get in family life, becomes available to members of the group through the process with each other. And in keeping with what John said about his experience earlier, you also have the opportunity to hear things about yourself that over time start to matter. So the opinion that other people have of you, the feelings they have for you, start to take up residence in your mind. And slowly but surely, they start to occupy a place in the mind that is up to that moment occupied by the voices of doubt, the voices of uncertainty that accompanied you into the group in the first place. Those are the voices we grow up with that are not so helpful. And in order to slowly replace, or let's say it differently, in order to turn down the volume on those voices and turn up the volume on the voices of nutrition, that takes some time, but that's also possible in group. So you can emerge from the process with a very different idea about yourself as a person in the world, if you stick around long enough and avail yourself of the emotional nutrition that's available in group process.
Wow.
How's that sound, John?
Absolutely. Like, I want to go back to New York just to go to group again.
I'll go with you.
Right. I would say like a parallel to singing is that I love the terminology of turning the volume down on the voices that we had from our childhood and different aspects of our life, because I think every time that a singer stands up to perform, we have those voices going on, doubt, fear, all of these different things, ego, thinking I'm the greatest tenor in the world. You know, you got to be careful to tamp that down a little bit too and focus. You know, so I found that after being in group for a while, I was able to transfer that over to being on stage and pushing down the volume of those voices too, just during a performance.
Wonderful. In essence, that's your first audience. You know, your family is your first audience.
Yeah.
And being able to, like you just described, being able to overcome the doubt that is present in your mind because of what you were exposed to early in life, and start performing for yourself first and foremost, and then for other people who are in a position to help you know something more about your craft and your art. That's the goal.
Oh.
That's fascinating. So I've been teaching for many, many years now. And one of the most common things is that singers are afraid to sing in front of their family.
Mm-hmm.
So
I can attest to that.
Right.
So as a teacher, my father was an immigrant to this country from Poland, from Galicia.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to this country as a 7-year-old without any English. And he was made fun of.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually he spoke the Queen's English and 6 other languages.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a force of nature, my father. He could hold forth in pretty much any situation. So in response to that, I developed an inhibition that was powerful and undoing, that prevented me from speaking in front of him for sure, but speaking in public in general. So I had to eventually overcome that fear and the wish to assert myself and become even more effective in some ways than he was as a speaker. And he eventually did come to one of my lectures and did sit through it and had a reasonable question afterwards. So, so I know so much about this process, having had to work it internally myself.
That's excellent. So you also involved or had recently finished a film project about this process. Can you tell us about that, Doc?
So I'm actually working on a film now. You're talking about with the artists, you mean?
No, the other project that you did, the group.
Oh, the group project.
Yes.
Sure. So the group project film was a really fascinating artistic, mind-expanding experience for me, in that I was invited to play the part of a group analyst in a film that is unscripted. It's informed by narrative beats from a novel that a colleague of mine, Irvin Yalom, wrote a book titled The Schopenhauer Cure. So the film is loosely based on the book, but to capture the pathos of group, the director I worked with, Alexi Lloyd, came up with a production method that involves unscripted dialogue. So each of the actors in the group who play patients was given a very detailed biography of who they are, where they grew up, what they ate for breakfast, what their core conflicts are, what their goals are. And then we'd sit in a circle and we'd film for an hour and a half straight. You can teach an actor to be a group therapist for 3 minutes at a time if you had a script. But to capture the rhythm and the spontaneity, the pain and the joy of being in group, Alexi came up with the idea that it had to be unscripted. To give that structure, he needed someone with my background to help create a frame for the process to unfold in. So, sort of like an armature for a sculpture. You know, if you have an armature and then you build clay around it, and then it takes a form. So I'm the armature, and the dialogue that the actors produce in response to things they say to each other and I say on occasion, that became the final product. And for me, it was not so much about acting as it was just about just doing my job.
Being
I
you.
was trained exactly. I was just there doing my job. In fact, the actors would say, "And what qualifies you to be an actor? What's your background as an actor?" And I would say, "Well, actually, not much at all, except I've been reading my lines for almost 50 years."
Yeah, except you were typecast.
Right. I'm stuck with this as a career, as a character in a career. But I had the privilege of working with terrifically talented actors who were fearless in taking a deep dive into the person they were playing, into the character they were inhabiting.
Excellent.
And it got really fascinating because, you know, things would happen in the process and somebody would say something to somebody else, and when her heart rate would start to increase and she'd start sweating, was that her or was that the character she was playing? So the line between where we begin and end and where the character we inhabit, the role we play as an opera singer, when you take on a role and you start performing in that role, which part is you and which part is the character? Where's the line in that performance process? Is a fascinating question.
Wow.
That leads to what Daniel and I talked about, the Stanislavski technique, and how we, you know, the way I went through my career with the help of Stephen Wadsworth and Francesca Zambello, who worked with the Actors Studio, and to allow yourself to inhabit the character with your own understanding of yourself and how you would feel in any given situation, even though you might not have been able to go through murdering your wife, or as an example, but I kind of felt like maybe that would be a fun thing to experience. But I wasn't.
If you're married on a regular basis, you have to be willing to tolerate the sensation of murder.
Right. So, but to then go out and just open yourself up, and the most moving performances I ever saw, I think it was the person saying, "Here I am," and it was sprinkling of the character more than it was the person saying, "I am this character, and I'm going to show you what I think the character is." It's more saying, "I will let you see who I really am." And that was what always moved me the most. And the therapy on stage for me, to be able to, that's the biggest thing I miss about singing, to be honest, is the physical, visceral singing act of breathing and performing and doing all this, but also going through a 5-hour Wagner opera was like a 5-hour therapy session. I was able to let loose some feelings, and it was always different. Every performance was different. It was unscripted, even though I was having to sing all the same words and the same music. That's
fascinating.
As an aficionado of the John Kai's voice, because I have stalked you, every recording you have online, I can tell you, not only was it therapy for you, but it was therapy for us listening to you, my friend. There was an energetic, intangible there that was almost like a healing force. It was beautiful.
I'll do one tiny bit of bragging. First time in my life that I've ever bragged, right? Alan Rickman, the wonderful actor, who played, I think his most famous was Dr. Snipe or something in the Harry Potter. He came to a performance of Die Valkyrie in Amsterdam because the costume designer who had designed for Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula She had designed the costumes, and she was going to be designing costumes for his movie coming up, The Winter Guest, I believe it was called, that he was directing. So he came to show her support to the performance. And afterwards, she said, Mr. Rickman would like to go out to dinner. And so I thought, oh, this is wonderful. What a great opportunity. And I expected the whole cast to be there and have a big kind of party after the performance. So she gave me the address and I showed up, and there she was sitting next to Alan Rickman on a table for three. And it was just the three of us. And I was shocked. And it was a really amazing...
Shocked because
there were no other people invited. It was just me.
You felt special.
What was so unbelievable about the idea that he might want to have dinner with you?
Now he's going to start therapy.
It's unavoidable. I mean, if you're going to tell the story, if you're going to tell the story, tell it in detail, man.
Well, I still, even at that point, and that was pretty close right after you and I had the session where I couldn't sing, and was able to come out of that and start singing again. But I still was, those voices were still loud enough to make me feel like I wasn't worthy of that. And then when we sat down and had this dinner, I was nervous the whole time trying to perform, even at the dinner. And he had a way of being so calm and so quiet, and would let me kind of go off on my, craziness. And he would just kind of listen, and then...
He was Canadian, after all.
Right, exactly. But at one point, he just kind of stopped me, and he asked me, do you know why you're the only one here tonight? So he confronted me with that question that I had in the forefront of my mind. And I said, I have no idea. And he said, it's because out of everyone on stage, you were the only actor on stage tonight. And I wanted to ask you, how did you do that? It was incredible. And
how wonderful.
Yeah.
But what did you say? What did you say in response?
I talked about the Stanislavski technique that I had learned. And he had studied that as well. And so we had a nice connection. It was also interesting that once I kind of said that, then he turned a little bit more, I don't know what the right word is, but it was a change in his demeanor. And we started having much more banter back and forth.
He found a countryman. He found somebody who had traveled the territory he came from. Yeah. Someone who came from the same territory, actually.
Yeah. And he was very interested in how you could be a singer and still do
that. Yeah. That's wonderful, John.
Yeah.
So John, for the singers out there, and there are a lot of them right now who have those voices in their head that is limiting them. What is the how-to? How did you turn those voices down?
Well, so there was a thing I called the third eye. And so I would always put this third eye out here, and I called that my technique eye, my emotion eye, all these things that when I would want to just immerse myself in opening up while I was singing, I had to try to go all the way to the edge in rehearsals to find out as far as I could go, and then sometimes go too far and realize, okay, I let myself go too far because if the emotions get too real, it can close down your throat. And what I used that third eye for was making sure that the words were correct, making sure the rhythms were right. Sometimes that would get more present because of a difficult section or a really, hard phrase, things like that. But also to monitor a little bit if I was hearing some of those voices of fear and there was one microcosm. I used to get nervous about high notes, as many tenors do, that I wasn't going to hit the high note or it wasn't going to be in the right spot. And one of the things singers do a lot in rehearsals and in lessons is you start to do this to hear your own voice.
So, folks, he's holding his hand up around his ear right now.
Yeah. And that's a very dangerous thing for young singers to start doing, because you start to become totally reliant on that to monitor whether or not that your voice is getting out to the audience, because you want to hear it yourself.
Yes.
So one of the things I remember when the fear started to come in, physically, it manifested itself that my hands started to want to go up to my ears.
And I've seen that on stage. I've seen people do it on stage.
And there's a couple times in my videos when I put it in as an acting technique. But
Smart
but
guy.
that was my third eye saying, right here, it's okay.
Gotcha.
Because the voice of nervousness, fear, whatever you want to call that, needs just a tiny bit of reassurance to get through this phrase. And I'm going to allow it to, because sometimes that fear, it's you don't go into a grizzly's cave, you want to make sure that.
So if I can if I can riff on this, because we have something similar in psychological phenomenon. We make a distinction between an observing ego, which you called your third eye, an observing ego and a participating ego. So in a human exchange where you get activated and you get engaged and you just start doing what you're accustomed to doing, feeling the things and saying the things that you know are going to get you in trouble. In the process of group analysis or analysis on an individual basis, we help patients develop an observing ego, your third eye, a part of you that stands apart from the action and can see it from a distance and can begin to intervene in a way that allows you to step back, to roll back from the participating part of yourself so that you can say something new or do something new in response to an old stimulus. So what used to activate you and get you going suddenly becomes something observable and something that you can respond to from a different perspective, you're not reacting so much as you're responding to the moment. And a lot of what we do to promote this has to do with the meditative process. Eastern thinking has crept into the modern analytic canon in a very important way. So anything you could think of that has to do with Buddhism, with meditation, with developing awareness, that's part of what we teach in group analysis as well.
Wow.
Very similar to what you discovered.
Which is amazing, the parallels again. My favorite production that I ever did, and one of the biggest career changers for me was Robert Wilson's Parsifal. And he's very into the Eastern philosophies, and it was based on the theater of the no, and a lot of Tai Chi and all of these type of things, the lighting, everything, and very minimalistic. And any time that I would be in rehearsal, start to act, he would stop and say, no. And he would just stand on the side and kind of say, less, let this go, move down that path. And we would discover things together. And yeah, it was, again, I felt like I was in the New York City park doing those group things. And there was my favorite video that I ever had made of me during my career was one rehearsal where they were just playing the interlude music on a recording. And it was just Robert Wilson, myself, and Christoph Eschenbach, the conductor, in the rehearsal room. And it was this huge rehearsal room. And I was having to do that meditative kind of movement. And then they had a standing alone camera filming this. and Robert Wilson came up. He was all in black. I happened to be in black that day, and Eschenbach always in black. Robert Wilson comes next to me and starts to do the same movements. And then Christoph Eschenbach got up and joined me on the other side. And all three of us were doing this movement to Parsifal music, which is some of the most glorious music you've ever heard. And the three of us doing the same movements represented to me opera to a T. You had the director, the singer, and the conductor, and all three of us collaborating. It was a beautiful.
John, that was a group. Three as a group.
There we go. Yeah, exactly.
Is this available on YouTube or someplace? Oh, no. Please put it up. Please put it
up.
No,
I don't have it. It was just a rehearsal tape. And we played it back to watch and see what the movements and what he liked and what he didn't like. And then it got, I'm sure, just archived or destroyed. So yeah. But it's up here along with
you describe it. You describe it beautifully.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Zeisel, I have an experience that I pass on to the students that I want to get your perspective on too. It's in this genre of thought. I was singing with the Istanbul Symphony, and we were going down to a place called Aspendos, and my wife Pilar was with me, and I walked into the theater, this 2,000-year-old amphitheater that the Romans had built, and for the first time in my life, I had an anxiety attack. But I didn't even know what it was. I was just hyperventilating and breathing heavy, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So obviously I was intimidated by the magnificence of this theater, and my wife said, you have to go.
I would suggest it was more than that.
Okay.
I would suggest that if you're an artist working at the level that you worked or John worked, to perform and to use your instrument effectively, you have to remain receptive.
Mm-hmm.
If you're closed off, you're going to turn in a subpar performance. If you're receptive to the orchestra, to the conductor, to the music, to the audience, you're going to have a very different experience. And I would suggest that when you walk into a room or an amphitheater like that, if you're receptive, you're perceiving things on a metacognitive level as well as a level of cognition, conscious level of cognition. So there are things that are in the room or in the amphitheater that pass into you, that may belong to you, that may not belong to you, that may belong to somebody in the orchestra or the conductor or even the audience, because everybody in the audience is looking to see where they live inside of you. When you stand up on a stage,
absolutely,
they're identified with you in a very profound way, if they're conscious at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to understand where they live inside you. Yes. Do they have your voice? Could they ever have your voice? Mm-hmm. Could they ever stand up and perform like you? It stimulates an identification process and a competitive process, mm-hmm. and any number of other things that could happen psychologically. So if you're receptive and you walk into that amphitheater and you get anxious, I would guess that it had less to do with you and more to do with somebody else. And if you can do that, you're insulating your instrument, you're insulating your own performative parts, so that it doesn't threaten to disorganize you. Mm-hmm. What we call this in modern analytic work, we think about this as the narcissistic defense. So rather than sending the energy out toward the other person or the audience, we direct it toward ourselves, and the energy gets directed at us in a way that's disorganizing. So if I was to stand up and want to give a speech in front of my father as a young man, instead of having the energy available for me to put it into the words and to the performance, it would come back at me, and I suddenly became mute, or I suddenly started having symptoms that prevented me from performing. My throat would get dry, my hands would sweat. Mm-hmm. I would lose the ability to put two words together. That happened to me once in front of my father. And I had to use that moment to learn that over a long period of time, that same energy that I used at that moment to destroy myself can be used to direct myself in a performative way toward the audience.
Wow. Great take. Well, so what I did, thanks to my wife, I went into the room and I started to do whatever I call meditation. And what that was, there's a hotel in San Diego that I had sung at since I was a teen. And in that place, I was super famous. So I went back in my mind to that place and I heard the sounds of the people. Oh, here's Daniel. Daniel's going to sing. I heard the plates hitting each other and the silverware and the chatter of the room. And I just lived in that room and I listened to myself sing in that room and I felt the energy of that room. And then slowly my breathing slowed down. My heart rate was slowing down. And then about after 15 minutes of doing that, my wife came in. I said, I'm okay. And I went out on the stage and I felt like I was singing in that room in San Diego.
Great.
And that's the recording of me singing the song, John, that you love.
The tango.
Yes.
So what you did there was you created your own internal audience.
Yes.
You created a group that nourished you internally and that made it safe for you to go back out there and perform.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit like what I was describing before about, we call that process introject substitution. The introjects are the voices we come to adult life with, the voices that first accompanied us in life. But if you stay in group long enough, slowly but surely, the voices of the group members take the place of the introjected voice, of the original introjects. And you have an audience available to you internally that says, Daniel, you can go out there. You're going to be okay. We're going to be glad if you open your pipes and you start singing. We're gonna have a good time here. And that's essentially what you did for yourself.
Nice. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And it might be a too in-depth question for today, but what we're talking about and trying to gain the tools for doing this as for me, as my career went on, I feel like it was a bit of an hourglass in the sense that when I was young, I was naive. I didn't really know I should be nervous. I didn't know that this was
we call that being unconscious.
There were those moments too. But then as I went further along and with age, I needed more tools. So I guess my question is being, like for our physicality, obviously our bodies start to wear out over years and you have to take care of yourself better. Whereas the young man, I could do almost anything and get up the next day on 2 hours of sleep and survive. Is that psychologically, does the age element have an effect on people as well, as far as how many tools you need, how you have to work out that kind of ability to do that kind of stuff? Or is that just adding to your toolbox, I guess?
What would you say, Daniel?
Wow. So you're asking if age affects that?
If you need more of it from a psychological standpoint, or if you just gain more of it because of your experiences. I don't know.
For me personally, I can say I am experiencing that right now that I'm 65 and I'm an official senior citizen. All of a sudden, there are tapes that I never heard before. And I'm thinking, where in the hell is this coming from? Telling me this stuff. And if it weren't for years of experiencing those voices, I would have not been equipped to handle those new voices that are coming at me. But because of all of these experiences I've had in my life, I am able to look at them and put them to the side and have some level of cognition that not only is conscious, but is really deep within my heart. so that I know that I'm not just talking myself out of it, but that it's really true, and that I shouldn't allow those thoughts or those voices to have too much of an input into my reality.
So that's a great answer, because I think what you described is a person yourself who who's grown in life, whose conscious awareness has grown in life. So I think in response to your question, John, it's not age alone, but it's you can grow older and be as unaware as you ever were.
Mm-hmm.
But if you suffer enough and you're in pain enough, we tend to do things when we're in pain and discomfort. And with that, if you put that to use, you become more conscious, you become more aware, and that entitles you to a different experience in aging than people who remain committed to unawareness. And there are lots of those people.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, let's not try to list those.
Yeah, let's not turn this political. Let's not make this a political discussion, but we could.
Wow, that's I love this, and like you said, 3 people make a group. We are having a group therapy session
for sure. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dad. Well, I was gonna tell one other quick story.
Please.
About when I was much younger and how maybe ignorance is bliss type thing. I was making my Carnegie Hall debut with Sir George Solti, Kerry Takanawa, Leo Nucci, Luciano Pavarotti, and I was doing a small part in Otello, and thought it'd be a great opportunity for my future in-laws to come see me perform at Carnegie Hall. So we arranged for them to have tickets, and I was going to meet them backstage at the stage door, and they could come in, go through that entrance, and they'd love this performance. Wonderful. So I'm in my full tails and warmed up, ready to go. It's a half hour before the show. That's when they're supposed to arrive. I'm standing outside, and they're nowhere to be seen. And I'm looking down the hill. Oh, sorry, this is my new and whistle here in town. So I'm searching for them, looking for them, worried about where they are. They're driving from DC, all the stress about that. And I'm standing outside looking up 56th Avenue. And meanwhile, all of these luminaries are pulling up in limousines to go through the backstage to get into their seats. So I'm in my tails, and a limousine would pull up, Tony Randall would get out, and I'd, of course, open the door for him and allow him to go through, and he'd, give me a nod. And here comes Itzhak Perlman, and I hold the door, and the list was endless of all these people. And I'm still looking and looking. Well, they never showed up. And it was before cell phone, activity a lot. So I never knew what was going on. That means they're calling me to stage. I'm off in the back, and somebody comes out, you're on. And I have to go on stage at Carnegie Hall for my debut.
Oh my goodness.
But I never had the chance to get nervous in a way. I was more nervous about that, where they were. And all of a sudden I'm sitting on stage ready for me to start with this big, huge brass cord, and we're off. Okay, so they ended up coming. They ended up getting in for the second act. Everything was fine. Performance went great. And after the performance, I wanted to go tell Sir George Solti, thank you so much for having me, hiring me, this kind of stuff. So I was going to go say hello to him. Well, there was a very long line of people getting ready to greet him. So I just got in the line. And it just so happened that Tony Randall was in front of me and Itzhak Perlman was behind me. And they kept on looking. Tony Randall kept on looking back. And they were chatting, around me a little bit. And finally, Tony Randall leaned over and said, Itzhak, wasn't he the doorman? And they're like, yeah, and you were on stage too. I'm like, yeah. And they said, oh, did you get paid double for that? Oh, boy, did they have fun giving me a hard time for about 15 minutes waiting in line. So,
great story, John. Wow. Well, fellas, this has been absolutely wonderful. Dr. Zeisel, I really appreciate you being here with us today.
I'm very happy to get to know you, Daniel, and to see John again and connect again like this has been pretty wonderful.
Incredible.
So your film that's called Group, where can people find that?
So right now on YouTube, there's a web series we put up right before the pandemic. It's the prequel to the film. We just made a feature-length film that'll be titled Group in all likelihood, that will be hopefully by the fall coming out for film festivals in the fall. But right now on YouTube, if you type my name or you type Group the series into the YouTube search engine, you'll get a glimpse of what happens in Group. It's a wonderful dive into the process.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to that on the video.
That'd be great.
Of this, so people can see it.
Great, Daniel.
And for those of you that want to hear this amazing tenor that we have on today, Mr. John Keyes, his name, when you spell it, is going to look like keys to you. So I've already had several talks with other singers, and we're laughing about your name, John. But so type in, folks, John, Keyes, and you will be treated to an absolutely magnificent voice. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here. And folks, those of you out there that want to know more about my book, please go to danielhendrick.com, and you can get it from wherever it is there on the website. And thanks again for being here on the Daniel Hendrick Experience. And you guys were awesome. Thanks a lot.